Kristen's hands were shaking when she unfolded that document. She had searched every drawer, every cabinet, every file my husband ever touched. And she still didn't find it first. I did. My son told me to stay away from the cabin that weekend. Gave me some story about needing privacy. I smiled, said fine, and hung up the phone. Then I drove straight there, because 30 years of marriage teaches you things. And the thing Russell taught me most quietly, without ever saying it directly, was this: when someone tries to move you out of a room, find out why before you leave. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. This is only part 1. The morning it all started, I wasn't looking for a fight. I was standing at the kitchen sink washing the same blue coffee mug I'd washed 10,000 times before, watching the frost melt off the backyard grass, thinking about nothing except whether I needed to drive out to the cabin that weekend to check the pipes before another cold front moved through. The cabin sat about 40 minutes north of town, up a 2-lane road that wound through pine trees and past a bait shop that had been there since before my children were born. My husband Russell found it back in 1997, a run-down little place with a sagging porch and a dock that's leaned sideways into the water like it had given up. He paid cash for it, not because we had money to burn, but because Russell believed in owning things outright. He used to say, "You never truly own something if a bank can take it away from you." We fixed that place up board by board. I stripped the old wallpaper in the back bedroom while he replaced rotted floor joists. I painted the porch railing 3 different colors before I got one I liked. He rebuilt the dock himself, working every Saturday from June through September. When he finally drove the last post in, he looked at me with sawdust in his hair and that big wide grin of his and said, "There. Now it'll outlast us both." He was right about the dock. I just never thought I'd be the only one left standing on it. Russell passed 4 years ago, heart failure, the quiet kind that doesn't announce itself. He was there in the morning drinking his coffee at the table, and by afternoon he was gone. I know people say things like that and it sounds like a cliché, but it's the only way I know to describe it. One moment the house had Russell in it, and then it didn't, and every room felt like a different shape afterward. After the funeral, after the casseroles stopped coming and the sympathy cards stopped arriving in the mail, after everyone went back to their lives, I went to the cabin. I didn't tell anyone. I just packed a bag, got in the car, and drove north. I sat on that dock for 3 hours. I didn't cry. I'd already done my crying. I just sat there and listened to the water, and somewhere in that silence I made myself a promise. I would keep this place. I would take care of it the way Russell took care of it, the same way he took care of me, quietly, steadily, without fanfare. I would not let it fall apart just because he was gone. And for 4 years I kept that promise. I drove out there every other weekend, sometimes alone, sometimes with my neighbor Patrice, who'd known me since our boys were in Little League together. I restained the porch floor in the spring and caulked the windows before winter. I hired a local man named Daryl to help me replace a section of the roof after an ice storm took out 2 panels. I kept the propane tank filled and the pipes wrapped and the dock cleared of debris every fall. The cabin was mine, not in a selfish way. In the way that something becomes a part of you, after enough years, after enough work, after enough mornings sitting on a porch watching the sun come up over the water, and feeling for just a few minutes like everything in the world is the way it ought to be. My son Daniel was 34 years old. He lived about 2 hours south with his wife Kristen. They'd been married 5 years. She was sharp, the kind of woman who always knew the price of everything and spent a lot of time calculating whether things were worth it. She worked in real estate development. I want to be fair when I describe her. She wasn't cruel in an obvious way. She was strategic. There's a difference, and it took me a while to learn how to recognize it. Daniel and I had always been close, or at least I thought we had. When he was young, he used to fall asleep on the drive to the cabin, and I'd carry him inside wrapped in a blanket while Russell laughed at me for not waking him up. He knew every inch of that property. He was the one who carved his initials into the porch beam when he was 9 years old, and I pretended to be angry about it. He taught himself to fish off that dock the summer he was 11, spending whole mornings out there with a rod and a bucket, serious as a surgeon. That boy loved that place, which is why when he called me that Saturday morning in October, I almost missed what I was hearing. I picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Mom. Hey, sweetheart. What's going on?" "Not much. Just listen. Kristen and I were thinking of heading up to the cabin this weekend. Kind of a getaway, just the 2 of us. I wanted to give you a heads up." "Oh, of course. Let me know if you need me to turn the heat on ahead of time. I can call Daryl to—" "Actually, Mom, we were thinking, could you maybe not come up this weekend? We just want some privacy." Married couple stuff. I paused, not because it was unreasonable. Married couples do need privacy. I know that. I'm not the kind of mother who inserts herself everywhere. But something about the way he said it, the practiced casualness of it, like he'd rehearsed the sentence, made the back of my neck feel tight. Of course, I said, that's fine. Great, we'll probably head up Friday night. Do you need me to put fresh linens on the beds? No, we've got it. There was a pause that lasted about 2 seconds, too long. Okay, I said, have a good time. Thanks, Mom, love you. Love you too. I set the phone down and stood there at the sink for a moment. Then I went back to washing my mug, but I didn't stop thinking about that pause. 3 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang again. The screen showed Kristen's name. That was unusual. Kristen called me on birthdays, on holidays, and occasionally to confirm plans. She didn't call on random Tuesdays. Hello, Kristen. Hi, Margaret, how are you doing? I've been thinking about you. Her voice had that particular warmth in it that wasn't quite real, not fake exactly, but engineered. Calibrated like a thermostat set to the right temperature. I'm doing fine. Is everything all right? Oh, everything's wonderful. Actually, that's kind of why I'm calling. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and I really feel like we should sit down together, the three of us, and have a real conversation. About the future, about a lot of things. What kind of things? Well, the cabin has been on my mind. I've been doing some research, Margaret, and honestly, the property market up there has absolutely exploded. There are vacation rental platforms now that could turn a place like that into serious income. Real income monthly. I said nothing. And I know you work so hard to maintain it, and I just think you shouldn't have to carry that burden alone. There are people who can manage that for you. Take the stress off your plate completely. You'd have income coming in every month without having to lift a finger. I don't experience it as a burden, I said, a small silence. Of course. I just mean there are smarter ways to let an asset work for you. And while we were up at the cabin this weekend, we were really struck by the potential. What do you mean while you were up there? This past weekend. It was gorgeous, Margaret. You've done such a wonderful job keeping it up. But some of the bones of the place, the layout with the right renovation, it could easily pull $800-900 a night in peak season. I kept my voice very steady. Kristen, when you and Daniel were up there this weekend, did you look through anything in the cabin? Any drawers, any files, anything like that? Another silence, slightly longer. I mean, we were just getting familiar with the space. You know how, I said. Tell me how it is. Margaret, I'll tell you what. Why don't the three of us sit down and have that conversation you mentioned? I'd be happy to do that. Oh, wonderful. Yes. We actually had a thought about that there's a financial consultant we've been working with, a very smart man, and we thought maybe the four of us could. That's fine, set it up. I'll be there. I hung up. I set the phone on the counter and walked to the window and stood there for a long time. Then I drove to the cabin alone, not because I was panicking. I drove there because I needed to see if what I suspected was true. The first thing I noticed when I unlocked the front door was the smell. Kristen's perfume, something expensive and floral, still lingered in the air. I walked through each room carefully. The kitchen was fine. The living room was fine. The back bedroom where Daniel and Kristen would have slept had been used, bedding straightened, but not the way I would have straightened it. The second thing I noticed was in the study. Russell's study was a small room off the hallway, barely big enough for a desk, a filing cabinet, and the old wingback chair he'd inherited from his father. I kept it exactly the way he'd left it. His reading glasses were still on the desk. His coffee mug, a souvenir from a fishing trip to Montana, was still on the shelf. The filing cabinet drawer was not fully closed. I never left that drawer open. Not once in 4 years I opened it and checked the files. Russell had been a meticulous man. Everything was labeled and ordered. I knew the contents of every folder. The property survey, a large folded document in a brown envelope labeled in Russell's handwriting, was not there. My hands were very still. I stood in that study, and I looked at Russell's reading glasses and his coffee mug and the chair where he used to sit for hours just reading, perfectly content, and I felt something harden in my chest. Not anger, something older and quieter than anger. I started to turn to leave, and then I stopped, because I remembered something. We had been sitting in this room together maybe 7 or 8 years before he died. Just an ordinary evening. He was reading and I was paying bills, and somewhere in the middle of a comfortable silence, he looked up at me and said something I'd filed away without fully understanding at the time. You know, Maggie, every house needs a place where important things are kept safe. Not just important, sacred, and that place should only be known by the person it's meant to protect. I'd smiled and said something like, "Are you turning into a mystery novelist on me?" He'd laughed, and then he'd gone back to his book. I stood in that study and I looked at the floor. Old houses have old floors. This one was wide plank oak, original to the structure, the kind they don't mill anymore. Most of the boards were as solid as the day they were laid. But there was one board near the right side of the wingback chair that had always had a slight give to it, just a whisper of movement when you stepped on it in the right spot. I'd mentioned it to Daryl once, and he'd said it was nothing structural, just a board that had dried and shrunk slightly over the decades, leaving a hair's worth of space beneath it. I hadn't thought about that board in years. I moved the wingback chair. I crouched down. I pressed on the board in 3 places before I felt it, that slight give, almost nothing, like pressing on a mattress. I slid my fingers along the edge and found a gap barely wide enough for 2 fingers. I pulled. The board came up clean. It had been cut and reseated so carefully I'd never noticed. Original, the edges fit perfectly, no splinters, no daylight. Beneath it was a shallow space, maybe 4 inches deep, running the length of the board. And inside that space, wrapped in a piece of old canvas like the kind Russell used to protect his fishing gear, was a sealed envelope. His handwriting was on the front, 4 words, "Open this if someone comes with papers." I sat on the floor of that study with the envelope in my hands for a long time. The light coming through the window moved across the floor as the afternoon wore on. I didn't open it right away. I just held it, feeling the weight of it, feeling the solid reality of it in my hands, and I thought about what it meant that this envelope existed. That Russell had come to this room at some point, maybe years before he died, maybe when some quiet instinct told him to, and had written those words and sealed them inside and put them beneath the floor. He hadn't told me. He'd left it for me to find. And the fact that I'd found it now, today, after Kristen's phone call and the open filing cabinet and the missing survey, I don't believe in coincidence, not really, but I do believe that some things unfold the way they're supposed to unfold. I pressed the envelope against my chest. "You knew," I said out loud, to no one, to the room, to the chair, to the air that still somehow carried the particular quality of Russell's presence even 4 years after he'd left it. "You absolute stubborn, wonderful man, you knew I didn't open it that night." I carried it home, put it in my own desk drawer, locked it, and went to bed. The next morning I called my attorney. Her name was Carol Simmons. I'd hired her years ago to handle Russell's estate. She was thorough and straightforward, and she did not waste my time with soft language when direct language would do. "Carol," I said, "I need you to look at some documents with me before I sign anything or agree to anything. And I need you to tell me exactly what my rights are. When can you come in? This afternoon if you have time." "I'll make time." 3 days later, my son and his wife arrived at my house. They came in Kristen's car, a late model SUV that cost more than my first house. They came wearing the kind of casual clothes that are expensive enough to look relaxed. And they came with a man named Gary, whom Kristen introduced as their financial consultant. Gary had a soft handshake and a laptop bag and a folder of color-printed materials that he arranged on my kitchen table with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Renovation projections, rental income forecasts, photographs of similar properties before and after transformation, a brochure printed on heavy glossy stock for a senior living community called Meadow Ridge that was, according to the text, a vibrant resort-style community for active adults who want to live life on their terms. I looked at the brochure. I looked at my son. He was studying the table. "This is quite a presentation," I said. Kristen smiled. "We just want to make sure you have all the information, Margaret. We want this to be a real conversation, and yet," I said, "you already hired Gary. Gary's just here to answer questions. Gary's here because you've already made a decision and you want someone with charts to help me feel like I'm the one making it." I kept my voice pleasant. "Tell me if I'm wrong." Silence. Finally looked up. "Let me ask you something, Daniel." I folded my hands on the table. "When's the last time you came to the cabin just because you wanted to, not to evaluate it? Not to assess its potential, just because it was ours and you loved it?" His jaw tightened. "This isn't about. When was the last time you stood on that dock and thought about your father instead of square footage?" "Margaret," Kristen said, her voice tightening slightly at the edges, "we understand this is emotional. That's completely natural, but we have to think practically. The cabin requires constant upkeep and, frankly, the market." "The market," I repeated. "Property values in that corridor have increased significantly." "It would be irresponsible not to." Kristen. I said her name quietly, and something in my tone made her stop. "If you truly wanted to help me, if that is genuinely what this is, why did you make the decision before you asked me a single question?" She blinked. We didn't make a decision. We're having a conversation. You hired Gary, you printed brochures, you searched through Russell's files while you were a guest in his house." I kept my voice perfectly level. Those are not the actions of people who haven't made a decision. The room was very quiet. Gary began very slowly, very carefully, sliding his papers back into his folder. Daniel stared at the table. Kristen's mouth opened and closed. "I'd like everyone to finish their coffee," I said. "And then I think we should end this meeting here and take some time to think about what we actually want to say to each other." After they left, I sat alone at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I unlocked my desk drawer, and I finally opened the envelope. The envelope was thinner than I expected. I don't know what I had imagined, something thick, something heavy, something that felt equal to the weight of what Russell was trying to protect. But it was just a standard white envelope, sealed with the kind of careful pressure that meant he'd licked it slowly, deliberately, the way he did everything. My name was not on the front, just those 7 words in his handwriting in blue ink, slightly faded, the way ink fades when it's been sitting in the dark for years. "Open this if someone comes with papers." I sat at my kitchen desk with the envelope in both hands. The house was completely quiet. It was close to 10 o'clock at night, and the neighborhood had gone still outside the windows, and all I could hear was the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. I had made myself wait. That took more discipline than I want to admit. I'd carried that envelope home from the cabin the day before, driven the 40 minutes back into town with it, sitting on the passenger seat like a second person. Walked into the house, put it in the desk drawer, locked it, and made myself eat dinner and watch the news and go to bed like it was a normal evening. Because I knew that whatever was inside needed to be opened when I was steady. Not scared, not reactive, steady. Russell used to tell me that the most dangerous moment in any difficult situation was the first 30 seconds. He said most people make their worst decisions in that window, when their heart is still racing and their hands haven't stopped shaking. He said the people who win, and he meant that word carefully, not in a cruel way, but in the way of someone who had learned experiences. The people who win are the ones who wait until the 30 seconds have passed. I waited 24 hours. I broke the seal cleanly with a letter opener. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, and beneath it something else, a second document folded separately, paper clipped with a small yellow sticky note on top. I set the second document aside without looking at it and unfolded the letter first. The handwriting was Russell's, but older than the letters and notes he'd written during the last years of his life. Firmer somehow, more deliberate, like he'd taken his time with each word, measuring it before he set it down. "Maggie, if you're reading this, then something has happened that I hoped would never happen. Not because I believe the worst of anyone, but because I know how people change when money is involved, and I know how easy it is to convince a good person that what's best for them is actually what's best for someone else. The cabin is yours, completely and entirely yours. I've made sure of that. The document underneath this letter was prepared by an attorney, not the same one who handled our regular affairs, because I was sus of this to be separate, clean, and untouched. It is fully notarized and legally binding. Read it with your own attorney before you do anything else. I want to say one more thing, and I want you to hear it the way I mean it, which is without bitterness. I love our son. I believe he is a good man at his core. But good men sometimes do weak things when they are afraid, or when they are being led by someone whose values are different from the ones we raised him with. Do not punish him for being human, but do not let love make you powerless either. The cabin is the place where our family became real. Protect it, all my love, always Russell." I read the letter 3 times. The third time I got through it without my hands trembling. Then I set it down and picked up the second document. It was 4 pages, legal-sized, dense, with the kind of language that attorneys use when they want something to be absolutely airtight. I'm not a lawyer, and I won't pretend I understood every clause in real time. But the core of it was clear enough that I didn't need a law degree to follow it. Russell had filed an amendment to the property deed, a protective ownership clause that explicitly stated the property could not be sold, transferred, commercially leased, renovated for commercial purposes, or placed under third-party management without my written consent. Not Daniel's consent, not mine alone. He had done this 11 years before he died, 11 years. He had sat in that small study at the cabin, in his father's old wingback chair, and he had thought carefully about every possible way someone might one day try to take away what we had built. And then he had driven to an attorney's office, one I had never met, in a town 40 minutes from the cabin, and he had made it permanent. I sat with that for a long time, not with anger, not even with grief exactly. It was something quieter than grief, something that felt almost like being held. The next morning I called Carol. "I need to come in today." "How soon can you get here?" "An hour." Carol Simmons had been practicing law for 31 years. She was the kind of attorney who kept her office deliberately unglamorous, no mahogany, no diplomas behind glass, just a practical desk and 2 chairs and a woman who listened without performing. I had trusted her since she'd handled Russell's estate, because in those first terrible weeks after he died, she had never once talked to me like I was fragile. She talked to me like I was a client, which at the time was exactly what I needed. I put both documents on her desk, the letter and the legal amendment. She read the amendment first, slowly, without expression, turning each page with the same unhurried attention she gave everything. Then she read it again, then she looked up at me. "Where did you find this?" I told her about the floorboard, about the envelope, about driving to the cabin after Kristen's phone call, about the open filing cabinet drawer, about the missing property survey. She was quiet for a moment. "Margaret, this document is valid. It was properly executed and notarized, and based on the filing record here, it was registered with the county 11 years ago. Whoever searched that cabin looking for leverage, they weren't going to find what they were looking for, even if they had taken everything in that filing cabinet. Because the amendment isn't there. Because the amendment was filed separately and exists independently of whatever physical documents are in that cabin." She folded her hands. "Your husband was very thorough. He was always very thorough. Do you know if your son is aware of this document?" "I don't know what he knows," I said. "I don't know how much of this is Kristen and how much is Daniel. That's the part I haven't figured out yet. What do you want to do?" I thought about that for exactly as long as it deserved. "I want to be ready," I said, "for whatever they bring next." Carol nodded slowly. "Then let's get you ready." We spent 2 hours in that office. By the time I left, I understood exactly what I had, exactly what it meant, and exactly what my options were at every stage of whatever was coming. I walked out into the parking lot feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not invincible, not even confident exactly, just solid. Like the dock Russell had built. Like something that had been constructed carefully enough to outlast the people who doubted it. I had been home for less than an hour when Daniel called. "Hey Mom, how are you doing?" "I'm fine, sweetheart." "How are you?" "Good, yeah, good. Listen, Kristen and I were thinking we'd love to have you over for dinner Friday night. Just the 3 of us, nothing formal." I noticed he said nothing formal. "That sounds nice. What time?" 7. "Kristen's going to make that chicken thing you like." There was a particular quality to his voice, careful. Smoothed over, like he'd been rehearsed. Daniel had never been a natural liar. When he was 12 and broke the living room window with a baseball, he came to me within 10 minutes and confessed, unable to carry the weight of it. But he had learned somewhere in his adult life to soften things. To use words like a cushion between himself and whatever uncomfortable truth he was managing. "That's very thoughtful," I said. "I'll be there." I showed up at their house at 7 o'clock on Friday with a bottle of wine I didn't intend to drink very much of, because I wanted my head clear. Their house was large and decorated in the way that prioritizes impression over comfort, everything carefully chosen, nothing worn in or loved. Kristen met me at the door in a cream-colored blouse, her hair done, her smile calibrated to somewhere between warm and professional. "Margaret, you look wonderful. Come in." The dining room table was set for 3. The chicken was good, I'll give her that. Kristen was an excellent cook in the way she was excellent at most things, which is to say with precision and intention rather than affection. But the food was good, and the wine was poured, and for the first 30 minutes we talked about nothing that mattered. The neighborhood association's new landscaping rules. A movie they'd seen recently. Whether the winter was going to be bad this year. I waited. Because sometimes the best thing you can do in a conversation is be patient enough to let the other person get to what they actually came to say. It was Kristen who made the turn just after Daniel cleared the dinner plates. "Margaret, we wanted to talk to you about something." Of course, we know the other day it was a lot. And we felt terrible about how it came across. That was not our intention at all. I said nothing, I just looked at her. "We love you," Daniel said, sitting back down. We worry about you, out there at the cabin alone, all the maintenance, all the upkeep. We want to make sure you're taken care of. I appreciate that." "And part of taking care of you," Kristen continued, her voice sliding smoothly into the register she used when she was making a pitch, "is making sure your assets are working for you instead of the other way around. The cabin is a significant piece of property, Margaret. And right now, honestly, it's just sitting there. It could be so much more." "More than what?" I asked. "More than a place that requires your time and your money and your energy every month. It could be generating income, real meaningful income." "I see, we've spoken with a property management company," Daniel said. "Up in that area, they specialize in vacation rentals and they've done really well with properties like mine, like the cabin." "Yes," I set down my wine glass. "Daniel, When was the last time you were at the cabin just because you wanted to be there? He blinked. What? Not to evaluate it, not to walk through it with ideas in mind. Just to be there. Just because it's a place that mattered to your father, and it matters to you, and that's reason enough. He opened his mouth, closed it. I don't remember, he finally said. I know, I said. I know you don't. Kristen put her hand on the table in the way she did when she was about to redirect a conversation. Margaret, this isn't about sentiment. No, I agreed. It's not. That's exactly what concerns me. We just want to have a conversation about options. That's all. You keep saying conversation, I said. But you had Gary come to my kitchen before we had the conversation. You looked through Russell's files before we had the conversation. You contacted a property management company before we had the conversation. I looked at her steadily. What word would you use for the thing that happens after all the decisions are already made? Silence. Daniel was staring at the table again. Kristen's jaw was tight. We weren't making decisions. I'd like to know about the survey, I said. That landed. Kristen's expression shifted just slightly, just for a fraction of a second, and I watched it happen. The micro-adjustment, the recalibration, she was fast. I'll give her that. What survey? The property survey that was in Russell's filing cabinet at the cabin. It was there the last time I was at the cabin. It wasn't there after you two stayed there. Margaret, we didn't take anything. Then you won't mind if I have someone check the filings at the county recorder's office to make sure nothing's been requested or copied. The room was very quiet. Daniel looked up from the table. His face was doing something complicated, something I recognized from when he was a boy, and had been caught between two things he couldn't reconcile with each other. We were just trying to understand what we were dealing with, Kristen said. It was the first honest thing she'd said all evening. I know, I said. So was I. I picked up my wine glass, took one small sip and set it back down. Here's what I want you both to understand. The cabin belongs to me. Completely and legally and without any ambiguity. I have reviewed the relevant documents with my attorney, and I can tell you with confidence that there is no version of this consortium, no plan, no proposal, no management agreement that can move forward without my written consent. That consent will not be given for any commercial purpose. The possibly not ever. Kristen was very still. What documents? She asked carefully. My documents, I said. Russell's documents, the ones that matter, Margaret. I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. I want you to hear that clearly. I am not angry, but I am done being managed. I am done having decisions presented to me as conversations. And I am especially done having my grief treated as a vulnerability someone can reach into and use. Daniel made a sound, low, almost involuntary, like something had pressed on a bruise. I looked at my son. Daniel, look at me. He looked up. His eyes were red at the edges. I know you love me. I know that somewhere underneath all of this, that is still true. But love doesn't mean what you think it means if it only shows up when it wants something. Your father understood that. He showed me that every single day for 37 years. Not with grand gestures, with constancy, with showing up. I paused. I need to know if you can still do that. He couldn't speak. His throat moved. You don't have to answer right now, I said gently. Take some time. Think about what kind of person you want to be. Not what kind of investment you want to make. What kind of person. I folded my napkin, placed it neatly beside my plate, stood up and thanked Kristen for the chicken because it truly had been excellent. Then I got my coat and walked to my car. I sat in the driveway for a moment before I started the engine. Through the dining room window, I could see the shape of them still at the table, Kristen, standing, her hands moving with the particular agitation of someone whose plan had not survived contact with reality. I drove home. That night I called Patrice. Patrice has been my closest friend for 26 years. We had raised our kids in parallel overlapping carpools, overlapping school events, overlapping phases of exhaustion and pride, and worry that only another mother in the same trench can really understand. She was the person I called when Russell died at 2 a.m, and she answered on the second ring and drove over in her pajamas and sat with me in the kitchen until the sun came up. I told her everything, all of it. The phone call from Daniel, Kristen's Tuesday call, the open filing cabinet, the loose floorboard, the envelope, the legal amendment, the dinner. She listened without interrupting, which was one of her gifts. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Maggie. Yeah, Russell knew. I said. He knew. He protected you before he even knew he needed to. 11 years ago, Patrice. He did it 11 years ago. I didn't even know. I was standing in that kitchen, complaining about a leaky faucet, while he was driving 40 minutes away to make sure nobody could ever take what was mine. He loved you in a way that doesn't stop, she said. Even now I couldn't speak for a moment. The question is what you do next, Patrice said. I know what I do next. Tell me. I update my will. I make sure everything is as documented and protected as it possibly can be. And I keep the cabin. I keep it exactly the way it is. I go up there every other weekend and I sit on that dock and I live my life and nobody gets to tell me that my memories are an inconvenient asset. And Daniel, that one was harder. Daniel is my son, I said. I love him more than he currently deserves from me, and I'm going to keep loving him anyway. But I'm not going to protect him from the consequences of the choices he's making. That's not love, that's enabling. Russell taught me the difference. Patrice was quiet. What about her, Kristen? I thought about that dinner table. Kristen's face when I mentioned Russell's documents. The way her certainty had flickered. She's someone who sees the world as a series of transactions. People, properties, relationships. She calculates what things are worth and she optimizes accordingly. That's not evil, it's just a particular kind of poverty. She doesn't know what it feels like to sit on a dock at 6 in the morning with someone you love and have that be enough. Do you think she ever will? I don't know, I said honestly. That's not really my problem to solve. My problem is making sure that her vision of the world doesn't overwrite mine. 2 days later, I went back to Carol's office and we spent the afternoon updating my will. We made sure the cabin's ownership and its disposition after my death were documented with absolute clarity. We made sure there were no gaps, no ambiguities, no windows that a determined person with a spreadsheet and a property management contact could slide through. Carol walked me through every page. When we were done, she looked at me across her desk. You doing okay, Margaret? I'm doing better than okay, I said. I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. She smiled. Russell would be proud. Russell would be insufferably smug, I said. He'd be sitting in that chair grinning because he was right, and he knew he was right, and now everyone knows he was right. She laughed at that, a real laugh, the kind that comes out before you can compose it. I laughed too. It was the first time I had laughed in 2 weeks, and it felt like something releasing. Some long-held tension that had been winding itself tighter, since the moment Daniel's voice on the phone had sounded careful in a way it shouldn't have. I drove home from Carol's office with the windows down, even though it was cold, because I needed the air, because I needed to feel something clean and moving around me, because I needed to feel like myself again. I was still myself. I had let them scare me for a moment. I had felt the pull of it, the way that kind of sustained pressure from people you love makes you start to doubt your own perceptions, your own rights, your own worth. I had sat across from Gary's spreadsheets and Kristen's brochures and felt the specific loneliness of being in a room full of people who all understood that you were the problem to be solved. But I had not folded, and now they knew it. The following Wednesday, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. When I opened it, it was from the attorney who had been at the kitchen table meeting, or someone from his firm anyway. It was worded carefully, formally, the way legal correspondence is always worded to sound neutral when it is not. It referenced a mutual interest in resolving questions related to the property and suggested a meeting to discuss possible arrangements that could satisfy all parties. I forwarded it to Carol with 2 words: your response. She called me that afternoon. I've seen this before, she said. They're testing whether you're lawyered up and whether you're scared. What do you want to tell them? I want to tell them that their client has no standing to initiate any process related to this property, that you have retained counsel, and that further contact should be directed through me. Do that, Margaret. I want to be honest with you. If they push harder, if there's a legal challenge of some kind, it will be time-consuming and unpleasant, even if you win. Which you will, but still, I know, I said, do it anyway. She sent the response that afternoon. I went to the grocery store and bought the ingredients for the soup I made every winter. The one Russell used to request specifically, when the weather turned, a white bean and ham soup that needed 3 hours on the stove and filled the house with a smell that I have never been able to separate from the feeling of being home. I made a large pot. I put most of it in containers in the freezer. I kept 1 bowl for myself and sat at the kitchen table and ate it. Russell's chair was across from me, empty the way it had been for 4 years. I had never moved it. You were in so much trouble, I told the empty chair. You knew about that floorboard for 11 years and you never said a word. When I see you again, we are going to have a very long conversation about your communication style. The kitchen was quiet. I smiled into my soup. That was the night the real fear came. Not about Kristen, not about lawyers or property surveys or rental income projections. The real fear came quietly, the way the worst fears always do, somewhere around midnight when I was lying in bed and the house was completely still. What if Daniel doesn't come back, not from the house 2 hours south? I didn't mean physically. I meant, what if this was the thing that calcified between us? What if he had moved so far into the orbit of the life Kristen had designed that there was no way back to the person he used to be? The 12-year-old with the fishing rod. The teenager who called me from college when he was homesick at 1 a.m. and didn't want to admit it, so he pretended he was just checking in. The man who stood at the back of the church at Russell's funeral and cried in a way he thought I couldn't see. What if I won the cabin and lost my son? I lay in the dark and I let myself feel that. I didn't push it away or replace it with logic. I just let it sit there the way you have to let hard things sit when they're real. Then I thought about what Russell had written. Do not let love make you powerless. Not do not love him, not pull away, not protect yourself at the expense of the relationship. Just do not let love make you powerless. There's a version of love that holds on so tightly it stops breathing. That agrees to things it shouldn't agree to because the alternative, the conflict, the distance, the risk of being loved less in return feels unbearable. I had watched women do that my whole life. I had done it myself in smaller ways, in moments I wasn't proud of. Russell had never let me get away with it for long. You're doing the thing, he'd say, when I was accommodating something I shouldn't accommodate. What thing? The thing where you smile and absorb it and store it somewhere. You know the thing. He always knew the thing. I lay in the dark and I thought about that, and eventually I stopped being afraid. Not because the fear wasn't real, but because fear is just love with nowhere to go, and I still had somewhere to send it. I was going to love my son without letting that love move me out of my own house. I was going to hold the line Russell built, and I was going to hold it without cruelty and without bitterness. And I was going to keep going to the cabin every other weekend, and I was going to sit on that dock, and I was going to watch the sun come up over the water, and I was going to feel my husband in the boards beneath my feet, and the air off the lake and the particular silence of a place that has been loved for 30 years. Nobody was going to take that from me, not with lawyers, not with spreadsheets, not with brochures about vibrant resort-style communities for active adults. I got up the next morning at 6, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote Daniel a letter. Not an email, a letter, by hand on paper, because some things deserve the weight of being written. I told him that I loved him. I told him that nothing that had happened changed that. I told him that I understood fear, and I understood the kind of pressure that makes a person stay quiet when they should speak, because I had felt that pressure myself and I knew how heavy it was. I told him that I was not closing the door, but I told him that the door, when he was ready to walk through it, would open into a relationship built on honesty. Not strategy, not management, honesty, the kind his father had modeled for both of us for 37 years without ever making it look like work. I sealed the envelope. I addressed it to him alone, not to both of them, and I mailed it that morning on my way to the grocery store. Then I drove to the cabin. I let myself in through the front door with the same key I'd carried on, the same keyring for 30 years. Walked through the living room, through the kitchen, down the hall to the study. I moved the wingback chair back into place. I put the floorboard back exactly the way it had been. I straightened the filing cabinet drawer. I stood in the doorway of that room for a moment. Thank you, I said out loud. Then I went and made myself a cup of tea and took it out to the dock. The water was gray and still, the trees on the far bank bare, the sky the color of an old photograph. It was cold enough that I could see my breath. I sat in the wooden chair on the dock, the one with the slightly uneven legs Russell had always meant to fix and never gotten around to, and I wrapped both hands around my mug. And I thought, this is exactly this is the thing they could not measure. The thing that didn't show up on Kristen's spreadsheets or Gary's rental projections. This feeling, this particular quality of being somewhere that holds your whole life in its walls and asks nothing from you in return except that you show up and pay attention. That was what Russell had understood. That was what he had spent 11 years making sure no one could take away. I sat on that dock until the cold drove me inside. Then I made lunch, turned on the small radio in the kitchen, and spent the afternoon doing absolutely nothing that anyone would call productive. It was one of the best days I'd had in years. The letter I sent Daniel sat between us like a held breath. I knew he'd received it. I knew because Patrice's daughter, who lived 2 streets over from Daniel and Kristen, casually in a text to Patrice that she'd seen Daniel sitting in his car in the driveway for a long time one afternoon, just sitting there, not going in. Patrice told me that without me asking, she knew I needed to know, and she knew I was too proud to ask. He didn't call, he didn't write back. A week passed. Then another. I kept going to work. I did 3 days a week at the local library, cataloging donations and running the Tuesday afternoon reading group for seniors, which I had done for 11 years, and which I had absolutely no intention of giving up, regardless of what anyone thought about my schedule or my age or my capacity to manage my own time. I kept going to the cabin every other weekend. I kept having dinner with Patrice on Thursday evenings. I kept living my life in the shape I had built it. But I thought about Daniel every single day, not with anger. That's the thing people don't always understand about loving a difficult person. The love doesn't go anywhere. It just changes texture. It becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you. It was on a Thursday morning, exactly 18 days after I'd mailed the letter, that Carol called me. "They've retained someone," she said without preamble, because Carol never used preamble. My hand tightened on the phone. Who? A firm out of the city. Hendricks and Park. They do real estate litigation primarily. Their specialty is contested property arrangements and estate disputes. I sat down at the kitchen table, so they're going to challenge it. They're going to try. I've reviewed everything again overnight, Margaret. They have no viable path. The amendment is registered, it's notarized, it predates any discussion of sale or commercial use by more than a decade. There is no fraud angle, no incapacity claim, no coercion argument that will hold up. But they may not know that yet, or they may be hoping you don't know it. What do they want? Their opening correspondence is asking for a meeting to discuss, and I'm quoting here, a mutually beneficial arrangement for the long-term stewardship of the property. Stewardship, I repeated, they're word testing, seeing what framing gets traction. What do we do? Same as before, I respond, direct all contact through me and we wait. They'll either escalate or they'll realize they're spending money they can't recover and they'll walk away. And if they escalate, then we show up and we win. She paused. How are you holding up? I'm fine, Margaret. I'm fine and I'm angry, I said. I'm angry that my son is allowing his name to be attached to this. I'm angry that there's a law firm somewhere that got paid to send a letter about the stewardship of a place they have never stood in. That anger is appropriate, Carol said. Keep it. Just don't let them see it. I know. I hung up and sat at the table and looked out the window for a long moment. Then I did something I hadn't done since Russell's funeral. I went to his closet. It sounds strange, maybe, but Russell's closet was the last room in the house I had left exactly as it was. Not as a shrine, I'm not a person given to shrines, but because some things take longer than others to close, and I had decided years ago that nobody, including myself, was going to put a deadline on what I did with his clothes. His flannel shirts were still on the hangers, his good jacket. His 2 pairs of dress shoes aligned on the floor, and on the shelf above his old fishing hat canvas, stained with lake water and years, too battered to be worn anywhere except exactly where it was meant to be worn. I took it down, held it in both hands. They hired lawyers, I told it. Your son hired lawyers. I put the hat on the shelf and walked back to the kitchen and made myself a second cup of coffee and called Patrice. They retained a litigation firm, I said when she answered. A pause, a short controlled exhale on her end. Okay, she said. Okay, what do you need? I need you to come over. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She was there in 15. We sat at the kitchen table with our coffee and I told her everything Carol had said. Patrice listened the way she always listened, completely, without fidgeting, without filling silence unnecessarily. When I finished, she wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me. Are you scared? Yes, I said, because it was Patrice. I could say yes to Patrice, of losing the cabin, of what this means about Daniel. I looked down at my coffee. You can fight a legal document. You can't fight a person who has decided that you're an obstacle. If that's where he is, if Kristen has moved him to the place where his own mother is just a problem to be solved, I don't know how to reach him from there. He hasn't said that. He hired lawyers. Kristen hired lawyers. Those are not the same person, he let her. The room was quiet. When Russell was sick, I said, and I rarely talked about the period before Russell died, the long, slow months of heart trouble that preceded the final day. Daniel came every weekend. Every single weekend, he drove 2 hours each way, and he never complained, and he never made it about himself. He'd sit with his father for hours, just talking about nothing. Baseball, old movies, whatever Russell wanted, and I watched my son be so good during that time. So genuinely, instinctively good. I thought that was who he was. The real foundation of him. It is who he is, Patrice said. Then why? Because good people make bad choices when they're afraid, Maggie. You know that. Russell wrote it to you. She leaned forward slightly. Being good at your core doesn't mean you don't sometimes let the wrong things steer you. It just means you can find your way back, I nodded. I just need him to want to, I said. Patrice reached across the table and squeezed my hand once. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. 3 days later, Carol received the formal response from Hendricks and Park. She called me as soon as she read it. They're asking to contest the validity of the amendment on the grounds that Russell may have lacked full disclosure to you at the time of filing, and that the document therefore represents an inequitable unilateral action affecting marital property. Stared at the wall. This Russell didn't tell me. They're suggesting that the fact that the document was filed without your direct participation could constitute grounds to challenge it. He was protecting me. I know, Carol said. And we can demonstrate that. We can demonstrate the intent, the filing record, the absence of any competing claim for Yummy's during his life, the letter he wrote explaining his intent. This argument won't survive contact with a judge who reads the full record. But it means they're willing to put his memory on the table, Margaret. I want you to be prepared for that. The back of my throat felt like something had tightened around it. They were going to argue that Russell had done something wrong. They were going to take the most careful, most loving, most quietly devoted act my husband had ever performed on my behalf, and they were going to stand in front of a judge and suggest it was improper. Carol, and my voice came out very steady, which surprised me. What do we need? Everything we have, which is substantial. The original letter, the full amendment with filing record, testimony if necessary, regarding Russell's intent and your reliance on the property. I'd also like to depose the attorney who prepared the amendment. He's still practicing. I've already located him. His testimony about Russell's instructions and state of mind will matter. Do it, I said. Do all of it. I want to warn you this could take months. I have months, I said. I have more months than they think I do. That night I did not sleep well, not because I was afraid of losing. I believed Carol. I believed the law. I believed in the paper Russell had put beneath the floorboard 11 years before anyone needed it. What kept me awake was the image of someone standing in a courtroom and suggesting that my husband's love was a legal problem to be untangled. Russell, who had replaced every rotted board on that dock himself. Russell, who had driven 40 minutes to a separate attorney to make sure that if he died before I did, I would still be protected. Russell, whose reading glasses were still on the desk in the study because I hadn't moved them in 4 years. That image burned. I turned on the lamp and picked up the letter from the nightstand. I had moved it there, from the desks when the legal situation escalated, because I wanted it close, and I read it again. Do not let love make you powerless. I set the letter down and turned off the lamp. I lay in the dark and I thought, if they want to put Russell on the table, then I will make sure the table shows everything he was. Every board he replaced, every Saturday he spent on that dock, every mile he drove to an attorney's office to protect a woman he had already been married to for 26 years, because he did not take for granted that love alone would be enough. Let them try to make that look like something other than what it was. The next morning I called my neighbor across the street, a retired man named Bert who had known Russell for 15 years and who had on 3 separate occasions helped Russell haul lumber up to the cabin on his trailer. I called 2 couples from our church who had visited the cabin with us over the years. I called Russell's brother Gerald, who lived in Wisconsin and who, despite the distance, had spent more weekends at that cabin than most people we'd known locally. I didn't call them to testify, not yet. I called them because I needed to remember in concrete terms that the life we had built at that place was real and witnessed and woven into the memory of people who were still alive to speak to it. Every single one of them picked up. Every single one of them said some version of the same thing. Tell me what you need. Gerald called me back 20 minutes after we hung up and said, Maggie, I will drive down from Wisconsin and sit on your porch every day for a month if that's what it takes. I laughed. It was a wet laugh, the kind that's trying not to be crying. Not yet, I told him, but I'll let you know. It was 2 weeks later on a Tuesday that something happened that I had not anticipated. I was at the library resolving the large print fiction returns from the weekend when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it. I kept it on silent during library hours as a matter of professional habit. But something made me look. The text was from a number I didn't recognize. It said, Margaret, this is Kristen. I'm texting from a different phone because I need to say something to you without Daniel knowing. I need to talk to you, not through lawyers, just us. Can we meet? I stood in the large print fiction aisle holding my phone. My first instinct was to forward the text directly to Carol. My second instinct was to say no. My third instinct, the one that came from somewhere deeper than strategy, told me to stop and think about what it meant that she was reaching out on a different phone. Without Daniel knowing, something had shifted. I thought about Carol's voice. They're willing to put his memory on the table. I thought about the litigation firm and the formal language and the framing of Russell's amendment as a unilateral action. I thought about the version of Kristen who had sat across from me at that dinner table with her calibrated warmth and her rental income projections. And then I thought about what Patrice had said, Kristen hired lawyers. Those are not the same person. I stood in the aisle for a long moment. Then I typed back Thursday, the diner on Maple, 10 o'clock. Come alone, she replied within 30 seconds. I'll be there. I told Carol that evening. The silence on Carol's end lasted longer than usual. I want to advise against this, she finally said. I know, whatever she says to you in that diner, if it becomes legally relevant later, it gets complicated. And if she's recording, she's not recording. You don't know that. Carol, she texted me from a different phone so her husband wouldn't know. She's not recording. Another pause. What do you think she wants? I think, I said slowly, working it out as I spoke, that something has changed in that house. And I think she knows which way this is actually going to go, and I think she's looking for a door. Or she's looking for information about what you have. Then she won't get it, Margaret. I've been handling difficult conversations my entire adult life, I said, not unkindly. I raised a child, I buried a husband, I sat across from a financial consultant named Gary and didn't throw anything. I can sit across from Kristen in a diner. Carol made a sound that was not quite a laugh. All right, she said, but don't agree to anything. Don't confirm anything about the documents, and call me the moment it's over. Yes, ma'am. I arrived at the diner on Thursday at 9:55. I took a booth in the back with a sightline to the door. I ordered coffee and did not look at my phone. Kristen walked in at 10:03. She was wearing less makeup than I had ever seen on her, and her hair was pulled back simply, and she looked smaller was the word that came to me, though she was the same height she'd always been. She looked like something she'd been holding up for a long time had gotten heavier. She slid into the seat across from me. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she said, "Thank you for coming, of course." The waitress came. Kristen ordered coffee and waited until she left before she said anything else. "I want to be honest with you," she said. "I'd appreciate that. I've been the one driving this, the rental idea, the financial consultant, the attorney. Daniel went along with it because Daniel goes along with a lot of things I do, and I've known that and I've used it." She looked down at the table for a moment. "That's not something I'm proud of." I said nothing. I let her continue. "I believed what I told myself, that it was practical, that you were sitting on a significant asset, and not I believed I was being helpful. I'm good at believing I'm being helpful when what I'm actually being is controlling." She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. "I grew up without money, not poverty exactly, but close enough that money never felt like something you left sitting still. You worked it. You made it move. And I married a man who was raised by people who understood that some things aren't supposed to move, and I didn't understand that about your family until I was standing in that cabin and I could feel it. My hands were very still around my mug." Feel what? "The weight of it. I walked into that study, and I looked at his reading glasses on the desk, and I thought, this woman has kept her husband's reading glasses on the desk for 4 years, and she's not doing it because she hasn't cleaned up. She's doing it because she's not finished." Kristen's voice was carefully controlled, but something at the edges of it was not. "And I went looking in that filing cabinet anyway. Because that's what I do. I look for leverage. Did you find anything?" "A survey map, some insurance documents, nothing that helped us." She met my eyes. "I'm going to tell the attorneys to stand down." The diner hummed around us. Someone at the counter laughed at something. The coffee machine hissed. "Does Daniel know you're telling me this?" "No." "Does Daniel know you want to stand down?" A pause. "Daniel and I are not. We're having some significant problems right now." She said it carefully, like she was choosing which part of a larger weight to set down. "He didn't want this to go as far as it went. He never did. And I kept moving the line forward, and he kept letting me, and somewhere in the last 2 weeks he stopped letting me." "What happened 2 weeks ago?" She looked at me. "He read your letter." I set my mug down very carefully. "He didn't tell me he'd gotten it," she said. "He read it alone, and he didn't say anything to me about it for a week and a half. And then one night we were sitting at dinner, and he put his fork down, and he looked at me, and he said, 'I can't keep doing this.' And I asked him what he meant, and he said, 'My mother lost my father and she's alone, and she's never asked me for a single thing except to be the person she raised me to be. And I'm not being that person.'" The back of my throat tightened. "And what did you say?" I said some things I'm not proud of. About practicality and financial responsibility in the long term. And he just sat there and let me finish, and then he said, "Kristen, my mother sat on that dock for 3 hours the day after my father died. I know because she told me. I should have been there. And if I let her lose that dock too, I will never be okay." I was not going to cry in this diner. I focused on the table. On the grain of the formica, on keeping my breathing even. He said that's when I found out about your letter. He went and got it from where he'd put it, which was in his jacket pocket, by the way. Carried it around for a week and a half, and he read parts of it to me. Not all of it, but the part where you said the door would open into honesty, not management. He read that part twice. I could not speak for a moment. Why are you telling me this? I finally managed. Kristen was quiet for a moment. Long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Because I think you deserve to know that your son has been fighting for you in the only room that matters, she said. And because whatever happens with Daniel and me, and I genuinely don't know what that looks like right now, I don't want to be the reason you lose him. The diner hummed, the coffee machine hissed again. I'll call the attorneys today, she said. The case will be withdrawn. No conditions, no arrangements. She pushed her untouched coffee to the side and picked up her purse. The cabin is yours, Margaret. It was always yours. I just needed someone to make me understand what that meant. She stood up. Kristen. I said her name before I knew I was going to. She stopped. What you just said about the reading glasses on the desk. About feeling the weight of it, I looked at her directly. That's not something a person who doesn't understand love says. You understand it, you've just been afraid of it. Something moved across her face. Something unguarded and quick, gone before she could contain it. Take care of yourself, I said. She nodded once, and then she walked out of the diner without looking back. I sat in that booth for a long time after she left. The waitress came and refilled my coffee without being asked, the way good waitresses in small diners do, and I wrapped both hands around the warm mug and I sat with everything that had just happened. Daniel had read the letter. He had carried it in his pocket for a week and a half. He had read it out loud to his wife in the middle of a dinner neither of them was eating. He had said, I will never be okay. I had written that letter by hand at the kitchen table at 6 a.m. because some things deserve the weight of being written, and somewhere in the middle of it I had stopped calculating what it might accomplish and just written the truth. And the truth had apparently traveled 2 hours south and found its way into the inside pocket of my son's jacket and stayed there. Russell would have had something to say about that. Something about the long game, about planting things in the right soil and trusting them to grow in the right season. I called Carol from the parking lot. It's over, I said. A pause, a careful pause, because Carol was always careful. Tell me, I told her all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. The withdrawal will need to be filed formally. I'll want to see documentation before we consider anything resolved. Of course. But Margaret, if she does what she says she'll do. She will, I said. She will because she said she would, and because she understood something in that diner that she's going to have a hard time unknowing. What's that? That you can't optimize everything, I said. Some things lose their value the moment you try. Carol made that almost law sound again. Go home, she said. Get some rest. I drove home. I walked in the front door and straight through to the kitchen, and I picked up the phone and dialed Gerald in Wisconsin. It's over, I said when he answered. He exhaled so long and so fully that I could hear it through the phone like wind. Thank God, he said. Russ would have had a fit. Russ would have been completely insufferable, I said. He would have spent the rest of his life saying I told you so in the most understated possible way. That's exactly right, Gerald said. He would have just looked at you with that face. That face, I agreed. We laughed together, Gerald in Wisconsin and me in my kitchen, laughing about a man neither of us could stop loving just because he wasn't there. That evening I sat down and I wrote Daniel a second letter. This one was shorter. I told him that I knew he had read the first one. That I knew what it had cost him to do what he had done. That I was not going to pretend it hadn't happened or skip over it to get to a comfortable resolution, because I was his mother and I was not going to teach him that difficulty disappears if you move past it fast enough. But I also told him that the door was open, that the cabin would be there when he was ready, and that the dock his father had built was still standing, exactly the way Russell had promised it would, and that there was room on it for both of us whenever he wanted to come home. I sealed the envelope. I addressed it to him alone again. The next morning I mailed it on my way to the library. It was a Tuesday reading group day. 6 women and 2 men who came every week to sit in the circle of chairs in the corner of the library and read out loud from whatever book we'd chosen for the month, passing pages around, stopping to discuss or argue or laugh, occasionally getting completely sidetracked by something one passage reminded someone of from their own life. That day we were reading a story about a woman who plants a garden in soil that everyone else has given up on. I read my pages in a clear, steady voice, and afterward on my drive home I thought about soil. About what Russell had planted 11 years ago beneath a loose floorboard in a room I hadn't thought of until the day I needed to. About what I had planted in a letter written by hand at 6 in the morning and mailed to a man who carried it in his jacket pocket for a week and a half before he understood what it meant. Some things take longer to grow than you expect. Some things grow in the dark beneath the surface before anyone can see them. But they grow. That was the thing Russell knew. That was the thing I was beginning, slowly, to trust for myself. The phone rang that night at 8:30. I picked up. Silence on the other end, and then breathing, and then a voice that cracked slightly on the first word and steadied itself for the rest. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm sorry. I know," I said. "I know you are. I don't have an excuse. I'm not going to try to give you one." "Good," I said. I wouldn't have accepted it anyway. A sound from him, something between a laugh and something that wasn't. "No," he said, "you wouldn't. We stayed on the phone for a long time. We didn't resolve everything. You don't resolve everything in one phone call. But we talked about his father. We talked about the doc. We talked about the summer he was 11 and taught himself to fish off the end of it, how serious he'd been, how he'd come in for lunch with scales on his hands and that particular look of someone who has gotten better at something important. When we finally hung up, the house was quiet. I sat for a while. Then I turned off the lights and went to bed, and for the first time in a long time I fell asleep before midnight. The formal withdrawal came through on a Friday. Carol called me at 9:15 in the morning, and I could hear it in her voice before she said the words, the particular quality of controlled relief that attorneys allow themselves when something goes the way it should have gone all along. "Hendricks and Park filed the withdrawal this morning. It's done, Margaret. No conditions, no counterfiling, no reserved rights. Clean withdrawal." I was standing at the kitchen counter with my coffee, and I set it down very carefully. "Okay," I said. "Okay, that's all I get? What would you like me to say, Carol?" "I'd like you to sound at least slightly relieved." "I am relieved," I said. "I'm also tired, and I'm thinking about my son." A pause. "How did that call go, the one Thursday night?" "It was a beginning," I said. "That's all I'm going to call it right now." "A beginning, that's more than most people get." "I know," I said. "I know it is." I thanked her. I hung up. I picked up my coffee and walked to the window and stood there for a long time, looking at nothing in particular, just letting it settle. The withdrawal. The end of that specific chapter. The particular way that resolution doesn't feel like a finish line when it arrives. It just feels like the moment when you can finally put a heavy thing down and assess the damage to your hands. My hands were fine, tired but fine. That afternoon I drove to the cabin. Not because anything needed doing. The pipes were fine, the propane was sufficient. Daryl had cleared the gutters 2 weeks prior. I drove there because I needed to stand in it. I needed to walk through each room and feel the way the air held still in there. The way old houses hold the particular quality of their history in the walls. And I needed to let the end of this thing become real in the place where it had actually mattered. I let myself in and stood in the front room for a moment. Then I walked to the study. I stood in the doorway and looked at the wingback chair and the desk and the reading glasses and the coffee from Montana, and I thought, we won, Russell. You and I together the way we always did things. You built the foundation and I showed up to defend it, and between the two of us we held it. I moved the chair and lifted the floorboard one more time. The space beneath was empty now, of course. The envelope was gone, the documents with Carol, the letter on my nightstand. But I crouched down and put my hand in the empty space anyway, and the wood was cool and dry and solid. And I thought about my husband driving 40 minutes to an attorney's office 11 years ago, with a clear purpose and a steady hand, and the long-view patience of someone who understood that love is not just a feeling but a practice, a daily series of small decisions to protect and sustain the person you have chosen. I replaced the board. I put the chair back. Then I went to the kitchen and made tea and took it out to the dock and sat in Russell's chair with the uneven leg and looked at the water. 3 weeks later, Daniel called on a Sunday morning. Not a text, a call. Early enough that I was still in my bathrobe, which I appreciated, because it meant he'd called when he thought of it rather than waiting until it was polished and appropriate. "Mom, can I come up to the cabin?" I set down my "When next weekend? Just me. Is that okay?" "Of course it's okay, Daniel. It's yes, come up." "I'll drive up Saturday morning. I'll be there." Another pause, the particular kind that means something is waiting behind it. "Mom, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to know you don't have to answer right away." "All right. Did Dad know about Kristen? Did he see something in her that made him do what he did?" I thought about that carefully. "Your father didn't know Kristen specifically," I said. "He did that 11 years ago before you two met. But he knew people. He knew that money changes things between people, and he knew that grief makes a person vulnerable, and he knew that I would need something more than love to protect me if things went wrong. I paused. He wasn't predicting Kristen. He was protecting me from the version of events where anything could go wrong. He was that thorough. Daniel was quiet. He always was, he finally said. I forgot, I think. I forgot what thorough actually looked like. It doesn't always look like grand gestures, I said. Sometimes it looks like driving 40 minutes on a Tuesday to a lawyer's office and not telling anyone. He made a sound, low and slow, like something releasing. Saturday said, I'll be there by 10. He was there at 9:45. I heard the car in the gravel and I put down the book I was pretending to read and went to the door. He was coming up the porch steps when I opened it and he looked different. Thinner through the face. The particular way that trouble lives in a person's features for a while before it starts to leave. But he was standing straight and he looked at me directly, which he hadn't done in a long time. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then he stepped forward and hugged me and I let him, and I held on longer than I normally would have, because he needed it and because I needed it, and because some debts between a parent and a child are not transactional and don't need to be spoken. We went inside. I made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table in the same chair he'd sat in since he was 4 years old, and we talked. Not about lawyers or property amendments or Kristen. We talked about his father. We talked about the summer Daniel was 7, and Russell had tried to teach him to swim in the lake, and Daniel had cried with rage every single time he went under, absolutely furious at the water for not cooperating with his dignity, and how Russell had never laughed at him, not once, had just kept his hands under Daniel's back and said, I've got you. I've got you, try again. He never got frustrated, Daniel said. He got frustrated, I said, he just didn't perform it. How could you tell? I lived with him for 37 years. I could tell, Daniel, a real smile, the first genuine one I'd seen from him in months. What did he do when he was frustrated and not performing it? He went fishing, I said. Alone. He'd take the rod out to the end of the dock and sit there for an hour and come back like nothing had happened. I wondered why he went fishing so much. Your father had a rich emotional life that he processed through fishing, I said. I always thought that was a fairly healthy system. Daniel laughed, an actual laugh, surprised out of him. We drank our coffee and the morning moved slowly and it was good. Not resolved, I want to be clear about that. One good morning doesn't resolve months of damage. But it was good in the way that a first real conversation is good, the kind where you stop managing what you say and just say it. After a while he got up and went outside but explaining and I watched through the kitchen window as he walked around down the side of the house toward the old shed. I went back to my book. 20 minutes later I heard sounds from the shed, the particular combination of scraping and movement that meant someone was doing something in there rather than just looking. I didn't go investigate. Whatever he was doing it without asking for an audience. An hour later he came back inside, the fishing shed, he said. It needs work. The door frame is rotted at the base and one of the shelves is pulling away from the wall. Do you have Daryl's number? I want to get the materials list together. I looked at him. You don't have to, Mom, he said it quietly. Not defensively, just directly, let me. Daryl's number is on the fridge, I said. He called Daryl right there at the kitchen table, introduced himself as Russell's son, asked about materials and time, took notes on a piece of paper I gave him. When he hung up, he said Daryl could get what they needed by Wednesday, and he'd drive back up that weekend to do the work. You're going to drive 4 hours round trip to fix a shed door, I said. And a shelf. Daniel, it needs doing, he said simply. Dad would have done it by now. I looked at my coffee. Yes, I said after a moment, he would have. That Saturday night, after dinner, we sat on the porch in the cold because Daniel said he wanted to, and I never turned down a porch, regardless of temperature. He had his father's old jacket on. I don't know how it ended up in his bag. I don't know if it had been in his car all along or if he'd gone to get it. But he was wearing it, and I did not comment on it because some things don't need to be made into a moment. Can I ask you something, he said. Sure. Were you scared when you found out they'd hired the firm? I thought about being honest. Not of losing. Carol made me confident we wouldn't lose, but I was scared of what it meant. That we'd gotten to the point where lawyers were in the room. I paused. I was scared that I'd lost you before the lawyers even got there. He was quiet. You almost did, he said, not with self-pity. Just honestly, I know, I kept telling myself it was practical. That Kristen was just being smart, being forward-thinking. And I wasn't willing to see, I didn't want to see what was actually happening, because seeing it meant I had to do something about it. That's an honest thing to say. It's the truth. He looked out at the dark water. I found myself in a life that was very organized and very optimized and completely hollow. And I kept filling in the hollow parts with justifications, with reasons why this was the smart move or the right choice. And somewhere in there I stopped asking whether it was also the good choice, whether it was the kind of choice Dad would have made. What kind of choice would your father have made? He would have called you, Daniel said, first before any of it. He would have sat down with you at this table with 2 cups of coffee, and he would have said, "Mom, what do you want?" And then he would have listened. And then he would have found a way to build whatever you said. My throat felt tight. He was a builder, I said. That was always the truest thing about him. I want to be that, Daniel said. I've been a deal maker. I want to be a builder. The porch was cold and the water was dark and the stars were the kind of sharp that only comes when the air is clean and cold. And my son was wearing his father's jacket and talking about wanting to become the kind of man his father was. And I sat with that and felt it move through me like something being restored. You'll get there, I said. How do you know? Because you drove 4 hours to fix a shed door without being asked. He looked at me. That's your measure? That's the beginning of the measure, I said. The rest takes time, he nodded slowly. The following Tuesday, Kristen called me. Not from the other phone this time, from her regular number, her name on my screen. I answered, Margaret, Kristen. A breath. I want you to know the attorneys have been paid and dismissed. Completely. Nothing pending, nothing reserved. I wanted to tell you that directly. Carol confirmed the withdrawal. I know, I wanted you to hear it from me. A pause. And I wanted to say something else. I waited. I've been thinking about what you said. In the diner about being afraid of love. Another pause longer. You were right. And I've been in therapy for the past 3 weeks, which is something I should have done years ago. And my therapist says roughly the same thing in considerably more clinical language. I felt something ease in my chest. I'm glad you're doing that. I don't know what happens with Daniel and me, she said. I want to be honest with you about that. We're in couples counseling too, but I don't know. Some things may have cracked in ways that don't fully repair. Some things do, I said, and some things don't. You won't know until you try. That's more generous than I deserve from you right now. Maybe, I said, but I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because my son loves you, and that matters to me, and I am choosing to treat it like it matters even when it's hard to. Silence. I'm sorry, Margaret, she said, for all of it. For the consultant and the brochures and the attorneys, and especially for the filing cabinet. That was the worst of it, for me to look back on. Going through your husband's private things like they were inventory. I know, I said, I can't undo it. No, but you can be different going forward. That's all any of us can do. We said goodbye without the warmth of people who have resolved everything, but without the cold of people who are still at war. It was something in between the temperature of 2 people who have agreed to try to find their way toward something better, without any guarantee that they'll make it. It was honest. I decided that was enough for now. That evening I sat down and I did something I hadn't done since the whole thing began. I got out my recipe box, the actual physical box, the one with the index cards going back 30 years, some of Russell's handwriting on the ones for the things he liked to cook, and I found the card for the white bean and ham soup. I made the full recipe. I let it cook for 3 hours. I ate a bowl at the kitchen table by myself and put the rest in containers, and I labeled one of them with Daniel's name and put it in the freezer. It sounds like a small thing, but to me it was a decision. A decision that said, I am cooking for the future. I am making enough for more than just today, because there are people coming back to this table and I am going to be ready. Russell used to say that optimism is not a feeling. It's a practice. It's putting the extra chair out before you know for certain someone is coming. I put the soup in the freezer. Then I went to the desk and I took out a clean sheet of paper and I updated the list of things I wanted to do with the cabin over the next year. Not renovations, not improvements for resale value. Just the things I wanted: a small herb garden on the south side of the porch, which I'd been meaning to start for a decade. A better reading lamp for the study. New cushions for the dock chairs because the old ones had finally given up. Small things, personal things, things that said this is mine and I intend to enjoy it. I wrote them all down. It was a Saturday morning, 6 weeks after the withdrawal, when Daniel came back to the cabin with Daryl and spent the day fixing the fishing shed. I stayed out of their way. I could hear them out there, the sounds of work being done. Daryl's occasional instruction, Daniel's voice asking questions, the particular rhythm of 2 people who don't know each other yet working out the terms. Around noon, I brought them sandwiches and left them on the workbench without making it into a production. By late afternoon, the door was reframed and the shelf was secured. Daniel found me on the porch when they were done. He had sawdust on his jacket, Russell's jacket, and his hands were dirty, and he looked more like himself than I had seen him look in years. "Done," he said. "Thank you, Daryl's good," he said. "He's been taking care of this place for a long time. Since before your father died, he told me some stories about Dad." "Good ones? All good ones," he said. "The one about the roof repair that took 3 weekends because Dad kept changing the angle." I smiled. He wanted it perfect. Daryl said Dad drove 40 minutes to return the wrong gauge of roofing nail. Wouldn't let a substandard nail touch the cabin's roof. "That is completely true," I said. "I remember that weekend." Daniel sat down in the other chair. "I want to bring my toolbox up here," he said, "and leave it for the weekends when things need doing." I looked at him. "That's a practical suggestion." "I'm trying to be more practical about the right things," he said, "and less practical about the wrong ones." We sat on the porch until the cold drove us in, and then we made dinner together in the cabin kitchen, the two of us moving around each other, in the small space the way you only can with someone you've cooked alongside before, without having to explain where anything is or who does what. That night after we ate, Daniel did something that stopped me. He went to the study. I heard him in there, moving quietly, and after a few minutes he came back to the doorway. "The floorboard," he said, "the one near the chair." I waited. "Did you know it was there, before all of this?" "No," I said. "I found it when I came out here after Kristen's call." He nodded slowly. "He never told you. He left the envelope and trusted me to need it at the right moment." Daniel leaned against the doorframe. That's such a Dad thing to do," he said. "Not dramatic, not even a conversation, just provision. Quiet provision. That's exactly what it was. I keep thinking about the fact that he drove all the way to a separate attorney. 40 minutes, used someone we'd never met, made sure it was entirely clean and separate." He shook his head slowly. "He didn't want any ambiguity. He didn't want there to be any question if it ever came to that." "No," I said, "he didn't." Daniel looked at the floor for a moment. "I want to do better by you," he said. "I know I've said that. I'm going to keep saying it less and doing it more." "That's the right order," I said. He smiled. That night he slept in his old room, in the bed with the blue quilt I'd had since he was a teenager, and the cabin was quiet around us in the particular way it was always quiet at night, the sounds of the water, the occasional creak of old wood settling, the simple reality of a house that had held up under decades of weather and love and loss and was still standing. I lay in bed and I thought about Russell. I thought about what it must have felt like to drive to that attorney's office on whatever ordinary Tuesday it had been. To sit across from a stranger and dictate the terms of a protection that your wife didn't know she would need. To drive home and park in the driveway and walk into the kitchen where I was probably making dinner or paying bills or doing any one of the 1,000 ordinary things that make up a life, and say nothing. To carry that knowledge quietly the way he carried everything quietly, as a gift rather than a burden. To put it beneath the floorboard and trust that love would know where to look when the time came. I pressed my hand flat against the mattress, the way you press your hand against something solid when you need to feel the ground beneath you. "Thank you," I said, to the quiet room, to the air, to whoever or whatever holds the people we love after they leave. The house settled around me, the water moved outside, and I, fully and without interruption, in the cabin my husband had left me, with my son asleep down the hall, and the deed locked in Carol's files, and the floorboard back in place with nothing beneath it now except the particular sacredness of a space that had already done its work. In the morning, Daniel was up before me. I came to the kitchen and he was standing at the stove making coffee the way his father used to make it, too strong. In the percolator I refused to replace with anything modern, and he had the back door open slightly because he'd always liked the cold morning air in kitchens, which was a preference he'd had since he was 17, and which I had spent years finding maddening and now found I was deeply grateful for. I sat down at the table. He set a mug in front of me without asking. We sat across from each other in the morning quiet, in the cabin his father had built and his mother had defended, and which now held both of their futures in its old wooden walls, and neither of us felt the need to say anything for a long time. Then Daniel looked up. "I have some time off coming up in February," he said. "A week." "Good," I said. "You should rest. I was thinking about spending it up here." "If that's all right, what would you do for a week?" "There's a section of the dock," he said, "on the east side. Second board from the end. It's got a soft spot developing. I noticed it last time. I want to replace it before winter ice makes it worse." I looked at my son. He was looking back at me steadily in his father's jacket with sawdust from the day before still on the sleeve, holding his coffee mug in both hands the way Russell always held his. "February," I said. "The ice will have started going out by late February." "Good fishing weather," he said. "Your father always thought so." Daniel nodded, and then he looked out the back door at the lake, at the dock his father had built and promised would outlast them both, and something moved across his face that I recognized. Not grief, exactly. Something past grief, something that comes when loss becomes part of you rather than just something that happened to you. He was right about the dock, Daniel said. He was right about most things, I said. He was right about you. I looked at my coffee. He knew what he had, Daniel said quietly. He knew exactly what he had, and he made sure everyone else would know it too. The morning was cold and clear, and the coffee was too strong, and the back door was open just enough to let in the air off the water, and my son was sitting across from me in his father's jacket talking about coming back in February to fix the dock. And I thought this is what the deed protected. Not property, not equity, not investment potential or rental income or square footage. This specific, unremarkable, irreplaceable morning. The floorboard had done its work, now it was our turn. February came in hard that year. Daniel showed up on a Friday evening instead of Saturday morning, which told me everything I needed to know about where his head was. He didn't call ahead to say he was coming early. He just pulled into the gravel drive while I was washing up the dinner dishes, and I heard the car, and I didn't even dry my hands before I went to the door. He had 2 bags, a duffel and a toolbox. Traffic wasn't bad, he said like that explained it. Come in, I said. There's soup. He sat at the kitchen table and ate 2 bowls and didn't say much, and I didn't push him. There was something moving behind his eyes that needed room, and I had learned a long time ago that Daniel processed things the way his father did, from the inside out, slowly, and only when he was ready. After the second bowl, he put the spoon down and looked at the table. Kristen and I are separating, he said. I sat down across from him. When did you decide? She decided 2 weeks ago. He turned the spoon over in his hands. She said she'd been thinking about it since the diner. Since that conversation with you. She said something shifted in her and she couldn't shift it back. I'm sorry, Daniel. Don't be. He said it without bitterness, which told me he'd been sitting with it long enough that the raw edge had dulled slightly. I think she's right. I think we've been wrong for each other for a long time, and we were both too organized about it to admit it. She optimized everything except the thing that needed optimizing most, which was whether we actually made each other better. Did you? He thought about that honestly. No, he said. I made her more uncertain. She made me less myself. The kitchen was quiet. He looked up. Something moved across his face, surprise maybe, that my first question after hearing about the separation was about her. She's okay. She's got her work and she's in therapy and she's actually seemed more like herself in the last month than she has in a long time. Good. You're not going to say anything about her? About all of it? What would I say? I don't know. Most people would say something. She sat across from me in a diner and told me the truth when she didn't have to, I said. She made a phone call on a different phone because she needed to do something right without anyone watching. That's not nothing, Daniel. That's actually quite a lot. He was quiet for a moment. She asked about you, he said. When we were talking through everything, she asked how you were doing. What did you tell her? I told her you were exactly who you've always been, he said, which is the most terrifying and reassuring thing I know how to say about a person. I laughed before I could stop myself, a real one, surprised out of me. That is the most accurate thing you have ever said to me. He smiled, and in that smile I could see the boy he'd been before any of this, before the spreadsheets and the consultant and the litigation firm, before Kristen and the rental projections and the brochures for Meadow Ridge. Just my son, just the person I had raised, still in there, banged up a little, but present. Get some sleep, I said. The dock will still need fixing in the morning. He went to bed. I sat at the kitchen table for a while longer. Separation was not a small thing, I knew that. I had watched friends go through it, and I knew the particular kind of grief that came with the end of a marriage, not always the loud grief, sometimes just the slow, quiet grief of a future you'd imagined going soft and dissolving, leaving you holding the outlines of something that no longer existed. I didn't know if Daniel was grieving yet. Sometimes people didn't grieve the right thing until later, until the practical business of separating a shared life was done and the quiet moved in. I would be here when that happened. That was my job now. Not to manage it, not to have opinions about timelines or decisions or what he should do next. Just to be here with soup and a dock that needed fixing and a kitchen table that had held this family through everything it had ever faced. I turned off the lights and went to bed. The next morning Daniel was up before dawn. I heard him moving in the kitchen at 5:30, heard the percolator, heard the back door open and close. I got up and looked out the window and could just make out his shape on the dock in the dark, sitting in Russell's chair with the uneven leg, coffee mug in both hands looking at the water. I did not go out. Some mornings belong to a person alone. I made my own coffee and sat at the kitchen table and waited. And around 7:15 the back door opened, and he came in with color in his face from the cold, and that particular look of someone who's been thinking hard and has come to some kind of peace with what they found. "It's going to be a good day to work," he said cold. Cold is fine. Cold keeps you moving. He ate breakfast standing at the counter, which was another of his father's habits, and by 8 o'clock he had his tools laid out on the dock and was assessing the softboard with the focused attention of someone who has decided to care very specifically about something and is allowing themselves to do it. I watched from the kitchen window for a while, then Patrice called. "How is he?" "He's on the dock with a hammer and his father's jacket." "Then he's going to be all right." "I think so," I said. "Not right away, but eventually." "And you?" "I'm watching my son fix a board on the dock his father built," I said. "I'm doing just fine." Patrice made a sound of deep, uncomplicated satisfaction. "Come for dinner next week," she said, "both of you." "I'll ask him." "Don't ask, tell. You're the mother." "Act like it," I laughed. "I'll tell him," I said. The work on the dock took most of the day. Daniel found 2 boards that needed replacing instead of 1, which didn't surprise me. Old structures tell you what they need when you get close enough to listen. Daryl had left extra lumber from the shed project, and Daniel used it, working steadily and without drama, stopping for lunch only when I brought it out to him and set it on the dock railing without ceremony. He ate, he worked, he didn't talk much. By 4 o'clock the boards were in and he was testing them, walking back and forth on the end of the dock with deliberate pressure, feeling for any give or movement. I came out and stood beside him. "Solid," he said. I pressed my foot against the new wood. He was right. "Solid. Your father would say the same thing he always said," I told him. "What's that?" "That'll hold." Daniel pressed his boot against the board one more time. "That'll hold," he said. We stood on the dock together in the cold February air, and the water was gray and still the way it got in winter, and the trees on the far bank were bare, and above us the sky was the particular sharp blue that only comes when the air has been scrubbed clean by cold, and neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then Daniel reached into the pocket of Russell's jacket and took something out. A small folded piece of paper. He held it without opening it. "I've been carrying this since November," he said. "Since a few days after I read your letter." "What is it?" He unfolded it and handed it to me. It was a printout, small, creased from weeks of being folded and unfolded. A receipt, I thought at first, but it wasn't. It was a confirmation page. From the county recorder's office. I read it, then I read it again. It was a document request, filed by Hendricks and Park Christen's attorneys, for Russell's original deed filing, dated 3 weeks before any of them had sat at my kitchen table with Gary and the spreadsheets. 3 weeks. My hands went very still. "She started this before the consultant," I said. "Yes, before the phone call, before telling you they wanted a private weekend at the cabin." "Yes." I stood on the dock and I held that piece of paper and I looked at the water. "How long have you known?" "I found this in the email account we shared for the house stuff," he said. The confirmation was forwarded there automatically because the billing went to a joint card. "I don't think she realized." He paused. "I found it the week after your letter. Which is why it took me 10 days to call you. I wasn't just feeling guilty. I was sitting with what it meant that it had started before any of the conversations. Before she asked me about the cabin. Before she suggested the rental idea to me like it had just occurred to her. She had already done the research. She'd already paid for a document request," he said. "Which means she knew about the deed filing before she brought Gary in. She knew there was an amendment on record. She just didn't know what it said." I thought about Kristen at the kitchen table. Kristen with her spreadsheets and her brochures. Kristen saying, "We just want to have a conversation." Kristen, who had already, weeks earlier, paid a county filing fee to understand the terms of what she was dealing with. I thought about what Kristen had said in the diner. That she'd gone looking in the filing cabinet because she was looking for leverage. She had been looking for leverage from the beginning. Not in the filing cabinet, in the public record. She knew it would be hard, I said. That's why she needed the firm, yes, and she still walked away. Daniel folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She still walked away." I thought about that for a long moment. About what it means to start something calculating and end it honestly. About the gap between those two things and what it costs to cross it. "She told me she'd changed," I said, "in the diner." "I believed her. I believe her too," Daniel said. "That's the complicated part." We stood on the dock in the cold and didn't say anything for a while. Then I handed him back the confirmation page. "Keep it," I said. "Why? Because it's part of what happened, and the things that actually happened deserve to be kept, even the hard parts." I looked at him. Your father kept everything, every receipt, every document, every record of every decision that mattered. Not because he was sentimental, because he believed that truth needed witnesses. Daniel looked down at the paper in his hand. Okay, he said. He put it back in his pocket. We went inside and I made dinner, and we ate at the kitchen table and talked about things that had nothing to do with any of it. A book he'd read recently, a story about something that had happened at my library reading group, a memory of a camping trip we'd taken when he was 4, that had gone wrong in 3 different ways simultaneously and had ended up being one of the best weekends any of us had ever had. We laughed about the camping trip for a long time. It felt like breathing. After dinner, he did the dishes without being asked, and I sat at the kitchen table with my tea and watched my son move around the kitchen that his father had renovated and which I had maintained for 4 years alone, and I thought about how much space a person can leave behind them. Not empty space, full space, space that is still shaped by them, still warm from them, still organized by the particular logic of the way they loved. Russell was in every cabinet of that kitchen, and now Daniel was in it too, learning to be. The next morning, Sunday, I woke up before either of us had planned to and went to the study. I sat in the wingback chair. I looked at the reading glasses, the coffee mug from Montana, the old books on the shelf that Russell had read and reread until their spines softened. I thought about the envelope that had sat beneath the floorboard for 11 years. I thought about the day I had found it crouched on the study floor in the late afternoon light, feeling the wood give under my fingers, pulling up the board to find the canvas-wrapped envelope, waiting exactly where Russell had left it. Like he had known, like he had always known, I picked up a piece of paper from the desk. Russell's desk with his letter opener and his stapler, and his particular brand of paper clips that he had always preferred, the kind with the smooth finish. I picked up his pen, the one he kept in the ceramic mug on the corner of the desk, the blue ballpoint that was still half full of ink 4 years after his hands had last held it. I started writing, not a letter to anyone in particular. Just writing, the way you write when you need to understand something, by putting it into words rather than the other way around. I wrote about the cabin, about Russell finding it in 1987, about the sagging porch and the leaning dock, about the 2 of us working on it board by board. About the summers when Daniel was small and the winters when it was just the 2 of us. About the morning after Russell's funeral when I drove up alone and sat on the dock for 3 hours and made myself a promise. I wrote about the envelope. I wrote about what it felt like to hold it. To understand that the man I had been married to for 37 years had looked ahead, past his own life and into mine, and had quietly, without fanfare, built me a wall to stand behind if I ever needed one. I wrote about Daniel carrying my letter in his jacket pocket for 10 days. I wrote about Kristen in the diner, telling me that she had felt the weight of the place the moment she walked into the study and saw the reading glasses on the desk. I wrote about the dockboard. I wrote for a long time. The morning came up around me, the light changing as it moved, and I wrote until my hand was tired, and the paper was full on both sides, and I had reached the thing I was actually trying to say. Which was this: love is not a feeling that sustains itself. It's a practice that sustains you. It's driving 40 minutes to an attorney's office so your wife will be protected after you're gone. It's writing a letter and sealing it and putting it beneath a floorboard and trusting the person you love to be strong enough to find it when they need it. It's carrying a piece of paper in your jacket pocket for 10 days because you're not ready to face what it means, but you're not willing to throw it away either. It's fixing a dockboard in February when you don't have to, not because it's efficient, but because the dock matters and the person who built it mattered, and you want to be the kind of person who understands that. Love is a practice, and the cabin was the place where my family had practiced it imperfectly and continuously for 37 years. Nobody was going to turn that into a rental property. I folded the paper and put it in the desk drawer, not under the floorboard. Just in the drawer, where I could find it again when I needed to remember. I heard Daniel in the kitchen, the percolator, the back door. The same sounds, the same sequence as the morning before. I put the pen back in the mug and went to have coffee with my son. 3 months later, in May, when the ice was entirely gone from the lake and the mornings had turned warm enough to sit outside without a jacket, Daniel came back to the cabin. He had been coming every other weekend since February. Not always for work, sometimes just to be there. Sometimes he brought a book and sat on the dock and read. Sometimes he called me from the road, and I met him there instead of him driving all the way to my house first. We had established a rhythm, careful and new, like a path being worn into grass not yet deep but present. Heading somewhere, on the May weekend he arrived with something I didn't expect. A woman, not in a dramatic way. He didn't make an announcement. He just texted me the night before bringing someone. Hope that's okay. Her name's Beth. She's quiet. You'll like her. I texted back, I'll make enough coffee. Beth was a librarian. I know, I laughed about that for a full minute when Daniel told me. A librarian, Margaret, of all the things. She was in her early 40s, dark-haired, with the particular quality of attention that I have always associated with people who spend their lives around books as a kind of deep listening, an absence of performance. She came through the door of the cabin and looked around the way people look when they're genuinely paying attention, rather than composing a reaction. And the first thing she said was, "This house has been loved for a long time." I looked at her. 40 years, I said. You can feel it in the air. You're right, I said. You can. Daniel was watching us with the careful attention of someone who is trying very hard not to appear to be watching. Sit down, I told Beth. I'll get the coffee. I went to the kitchen and stood at the counter for a moment. A librarian, Russell, I thought. Russell, you would have had something to say about this. I could almost hear it. Low, amused, the particular dry satisfaction of a man whose instincts had once again proven accurate about something he never said out loud. I brought the coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us, and it was easy in the way that things are easy when the people in the room are genuinely interested in each other rather than performing interest. Beth asked about the cabin's history and I told her, and she asked follow-up questions that were specific and thoughtful, the way a person asks when they actually want to know rather than when they're filling time. At one point, Daniel got up to use the restroom, and Beth and I were alone at the table, and she looked at me in that direct, quiet way she had and said, "He talks about you constantly. I want you to know that. He talks about you and his father like the two of you are the standard he's measuring everything against." I looked at my coffee. "He's a good man," I said. "He lost his way for a little while. But he found it again." He told me about what happened. The cabin, the attorneys, all of it. She paused. "He told me about the letter you wrote him. He said he carried it in his pocket for 10 days. He told you that. He tells me most things," she said. That's one of the reasons I'm here, actually. He's someone who tells the truth even when it's not flattering to him. That's rarer than it should be." Daniel came back. Looked at the two of us. Something in his face eased when he saw that we were just talking, just two people at a table being honest with each other. "What did I miss?" he asked. "Nothing, everything," Beth said at the same time. He looked between us. "Great," he said, and sat down and reached for the coffee, and I thought, yes, this is right. This is the person who will ask the right questions at the right table for the right reasons. That afternoon, all three of us went out to the dock. It was warm enough to sit without coats, and the lake was doing that thing it did in May when the light hit it at a low angle and the surface went silver and soft. And I brought my tea and Daniel had his coffee, and Beth had a book she wasn't quite reading because she kept looking up at the water. We sat for a long time without saying much. Then Daniel stood up and walked to the east end of the dock. The section he'd repaired in February. He crouched down and ran his hand along the new boards, checking them the way his father used to check his work, with his whole hand flat on the surface, feeling for any give. "Still solid," he said. "Did you think it wouldn't be?" I asked. "No." He stood up. "I just like to check." He stood there at the end of the dock for a moment looking at the water, and I watched him from my chair, and I thought about everything it had taken to get from October to May. From Kristen's Tuesday phone call to this warm afternoon, with Daniel standing on the dock his father had built, wearing his father's jacket, checking a board he had replaced with his own hands. Some things that break can be rebuilt, not restored. Not put back exactly as they were, but rebuilt into something that holds the original shape and adds the strength of what it survived. That's not the same as before. It's better in the ways that matter. Then something happened that I had not planned and could not have prepared for. Daniel reached into the pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a pocket knife, the same folding knife Russell had always carried, the one Daniel had inherited, and which I had not realized he'd started carrying. He opened it. He crouched back down at the east end of the dock at the new board, and he pressed the blade carefully into the wood. I watched. He worked slowly, deliberately, the way you do something you want to do right. When he stood up, he stepped back, and I could see what he'd carved. Not his initials, not his number, 4 digits. 1987, the year his father had bought the cabin, the year everything began. I sat in my chair and I could not speak. Beth, who had been watching from her seat, put her hand to her mouth. Daniel looked at me. His eyes were red at the edges, but he was steady. "Some things are bigger than one person," he said. I recognized it, not as a quotation, as something he had understood himself, arrived at through his own losses and his own repair work, and which happened to be the same truth his father had understood before him. Yes, I said, they are. He folded the knife and put it back in his pocket. He sat back down. The three of us stayed on the dock until the light started going gold and the air began to cool, and then we went inside, and I made the white bean soup, the 3-hour kind, and we ate at the kitchen table with the radio on low, and Daniel did the dishes again without being asked, and Beth dried them, and I sat at the kitchen table with my tea and watched the two of them in the kitchen my husband had renovated, moving around each other with the ease of people who are genuinely comfortable, and I thought about soil. About what you plant and what grows and how long it takes. About Russell planting something 11 years before I needed it and trusting the ground to hold it. About me planting a letter in an envelope and trusting my son to be the person I raised him to be. About Daniel planting a year in a dock board so that whatever came after would know what it was standing on. That night after Daniel and Beth had gone to their rooms, I went back to the study one last time. I sat in the wingback chair. I looked at the reading glasses and the coffee mug and the books with the softened spines. I looked at the floorboard, empty now, its work done. Just a board, just a floor, just an old house that had been built by people who understood that some things are worth building carefully. We're okay, I said out loud. To the room, to the air, to whoever was listening. You can rest now, we're okay. The house was quiet. And in that quiet I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, though there was happiness in it. Not relief, though there was relief too. It was something more fundamental than either of those things. It was the feeling of a house that is fully occupied. Of a table that has people coming to it. Of a dock that has been repaired and is holding. Of a family that bent nearly to breaking and found in the bending the shape of what it was actually made of. I turned off the study light. I walked down the hall. I got into bed in the cabin my husband had found in 1987 and fixed board by board, and loved for 30 years, and protected for 11 years after that, quietly, and without telling anyone the way he did everything that mattered most. And I slept, completely, fully, without waking, because some fights are worth every day they cost you. Because love practiced with enough patience and enough honesty and enough willingness to hold the line, when holding the line is the only decent thing left to do, does not end. It builds board by board, year by year, generation by generation. It builds and it holds and it outlasts every single thing that tried to make it small, and so did I. Write a message.